So yeah, I'm a student here at Central St. Martin's. I'm studying an MA in graphic communication design. Much of my design research in this course has been a response to impulses within graphic communication design to simplify and reduce these complex systems that we're talking about to snappy and digestible slogans and messaging. You get this a lot in activism as well. But it's my belief that we can only hope to solve the climate crisis by getting to its roots. So a complex and nuanced understanding of it is absolutely vital. This means we cannot treat it as a single issue. This is exactly what this conference has been approaching today, is this kind of intersectionality and kind of inherent systemic connections between these issues. So I've also been an environmental and global justice activist for about 2.5 years. Excuse me. And in November 2020, a group of us scaled the Houses of Parliament to hang a giant letter from a group called Africans Rising to the government and the people of the UK. It was asking for an honest acknowledgement and apology for the true human cost of slavery and colonialism, and debt cancellation and reparations for Africa, among other things. The letter was written by activists on the African continent, and then they approached us to ask how we could sort of deliver this to the UK. So we turned it into a 7-meter by 12-meter handmade banner. Parliament was the only appropriate target because it placed the letter's appeal firmly in the context of politics, and the solutions to these issues are political. The new context also set the words of this African movement fighting for justice, peace, and dignity against the backdrop of the grandeur and wealth of the Houses of Parliament, wealth that was built on the profits of colonialism, slavery, and empire. The banner was handmade in 7 1.5-meter strips that were then sewn together. The letters were hand-drawn. It took a small team about 10 days to make it. It took a huge amount of labor, care, and collaboration. Working practices which I believe contribute to the meaning of the end product, because those values become legible in the handmadeness of the finished product. The process becomes the medium. It was an act of devotion, solidarity, and allyship as we pledged our time, labor, and care to support the Africans Rising cause. And it was an action that forged a great relationship between us. As a response to this conference series, I have chosen to continue this conversation by creating a new banner. I'm going to switch my background off and you will see it behind me. Sadly, today I ran into complications with the Central St. Martin's Health and Safety Department, who were not very happy about me hanging it up on the bridge where it was going to be. Sadly, it turns out the activist approach of do first and get permission later doesn't go down very well in universities. So anyway, it's still here. It's in the context of the university. It's still very relevant for what I'm going to be talking about. And I absolutely intend to get a proper shot of it hanging from the bridge later, and I will forward that to everyone. So about 6 months ago, I was part of a group that founded a movement called Jubilee for Climate. And Jubilee for Climate combines the urgency of climate activism with the universality of social justice work. We're not fighting climate change, but the system that creates climate change. Our thesis is that inequality creates the climate crisis, and debt is the physical manifestation of that inequality and the thing that locks us into the current system. So if we want system change, we have to start with debt cancellation and then move on to economic and democratic reform and some form of global and justice-centered Green New Deal to see us into a sustainable and climate just future. We're a grassroots organized movement working on the ground to support communities, raising awareness around debt relief, democratic reform, and the environment, whilst also building a movement of individuals and other movements to change the system that created today's local and global crises. The tradition of Jubilee goes back many years. It's in the Bible. It's what the Magna Carta was about. It was historically recognized that inequality was a great ill for society, and that inequality accumulates if left unchecked. So Jubilee was a moment or a mechanism where the debts were cancelled, the slaves were freed, and the stolen land was redistributed. So who owes who? Well, we're talking about all kinds of debt here. Debt in general is the driver of exponential economic growth, which demands continued profit creation, which demands relentless resource extraction and the exploitation of people and planet. Part of the aim of this project is to challenge or unsettle mainstream narratives that exist around debt. We're talking about global South debt. In 2020, public debt of countries in Africa was an average of 65% of GDP. This is an average. Debt makes you act on horrible necessity. This is how debt is driving the climate crisis. You can't plan for the future and you have to make, excuse me, short-term decisions. You sell off land rights, you allow big corporations to come and drill for oil or for gas because you need to create a profit to service the debts. This is actually happening in Suriname right now. They're experiencing a financial crisis, and the IMF and World Bank have characteristically come in and said, hey, yeah, we'll restructure your debts for you and sort this out. But you're going to need to pay these creditors off. And we've noticed you've got some really big oil reserves just offshore there. So you let us access those and we can sort your creditors out, then great, we can come to an arrangement. So hence debt drives the climate crisis. But who owes who? Do the global south really owe the global north? Most of these debts are illegitimate in the first place. Either they're indirect legacies of colonialism with countries essentially forced to pay for their independence, or they've already been paid off, but the interest is compounded so much they're still paying, or the original money was loaned to a corrupt leader and the country's people never saw a penny of it. The relationship between the global north and the global south is frequently characterized in terms of this debt and aid. Occasionally we're incredibly generous and we give them financial support, but they also owe us lots of money. But Jason Hickel's research shows that for every $1 that's transferred from the global north to the global south in terms of aid, $24 flows back from the global south to the global north. And this is through largely very legitimate trade practices. I mean, some legal, some illegal, illicit financial flows, trade misinvoicing, tax havens, but all business as usual for global trade, most of which goes through the City of London, which is why we need to have this conversation here, because we're uniquely placed to talk about it. So who owes who? What about the legacies of colonialism and slavery? What about the fact that the wealth of Europe is the extracted wealth of the global south? What about all the art that was stolen that's filling up our museums and galleries? What about reparations for colonialism and slavery? And what about the fact that the global south are on the front lines of a climate crisis they did not create? What about climate debt? What about loss and damage? This is one of the most important parts of the COP discussions, and it basically got scrapped. And then let's look at why I put this banner here in Central St. Martin's in UAL. Who owes who in this space? Well, obviously, neoliberalism and the monetization of academic institutions is generating huge levels of student debt. Most of us will be paying this off for the best part of our lives. And in recent news, they're talking about changing the restrictions for student loans so that there's a minimum grade requirement to be able to access them. So you're systematically shutting people out from disadvantaged backgrounds there. The rich get richer by impoverishing the poor and then secure their kids' futures with the money they stole. And because the whole financial system is designed to do just that, it doesn't have to be this way, but we've been conned into accepting it because capitalism and neoliberalism are presented as the only options. This conference is also taking place the day after the UCU strikes end. Staff working conditions are students' learning conditions. The issues of casualization, precarity, overwork, inequality. Students are affected when their tutors are under these strains, and they're facing their own financial pressures, battling overwork. And the inequality across gender and race lines means that these effects are felt by the students too. While I fully support the strikes, we students carry the burden doubly. We still have the debts that we've accumulated to pay for these courses, and then we get less teaching. And what we do have is a reduced quality because the teachers are all under strain. We pay more, but we receive less. Education as a profit-making enterprise is not conducive to a good or healthy learning experience. So again, who owes who here? This is designed to be a provocation. It's designed to be open on many levels. We can talk about multiple forms of debt in the one thing. As with the Parliament banner, this can be read in the material qualities too. The design, the creation, the location, the context. Ordinarily, I would always want to use an opportunity like this to collaborate, to platform marginalized voices and those people who are disproportionately affected by the issues being raised today. But given the limited time available, I tried my best to achieve these things in the design and the creation. The font is designed by Trey Seals, a Black type designer in the US, whose type foundry Vocal Type seeks to challenge diversity in the graphic design industry by highlighting, each of his typefaces highlights a piece of history from a specific underrepresented race, ethnicity, or gender. This particular one is named Eva, after Eva Perón, who was a great pioneer of women's suffrage in Argentina, and is inspired by the banners carried during a 1957 women's demonstration in Buenos Aires. The applique style of the fabric banner for me evokes a long tradition of labor movement protest banners. The background is made of recycled bed sheets, of course made from cotton, which comes steeped in its own colonial history. And the fabrics for the letters also have a complex history. While I chose them to evoke our kind of colonial history with Africa, and also so that any money spent on materials went directly to Black businesses in my local area, it turns out they also illustrate the complexity of colonial history far more acutely than I could have hoped. From what I must acknowledge is my limited research, it seems that English colonizers in Indonesia were entranced by their beautiful batiks, brought some home to try and recreate them in the 19th century. They succeeded and found cheaper mechanized ways to do it. Dutch started mass producing the fabrics and then exporting them to their colonies, including Ghana, where many of these fabrics on my banner are supposedly from. This is a classic story of the Industrial Revolution and empire. The Industrial Revolution increased the production capacity of Western states astronomically, so there was an enormous hunger for raw materials to satisfy demands. Thus, the Western powers sought colonies where raw materials were abundant and where they could be appropriated at little to no cost. Of course, their eyes were on Africa. Additionally, the colonies gave Western powers a ready-made market for their goods, as the colonized people were left with little to no legal recourse to produce their own finished products. Which is a nice transition to location and context. I'm nearly done here, I'm conscious of time. As well as speaking to the debt relations within the university space, we're also set against the backdrop of these old industrial buildings, Coal Drops Yard, Granary Square, a visual remnant of trade, industry, and empire. Coal Drops Yard is a particular reminder, and all of the big gas towers that are all around central St. Martin's, of the vast amounts of fossil fuels consumed in our industrial revolution and the beginnings of the steady upwards creep of our global temperature. The building interior was actually designed to be a shopping mall, so even when the university ceases to be profitable, it can be easily converted. One of the technicians pointed out to me that if you've ever noticed, the workshops, all of the kind of technical workshops, are the exact size and shape of a top shop, in case you wanted a reminder that education is just another tradable commodity these days. I do want to acknowledge briefly before I finish that I might have made mistakes in this. In this instance, I did work alone, and though I cannot really claim the piece as my own because it draws greatly on Jubilee, on a lot of group activism we've been doing, on our relationship with Africans Rising, ordinarily I would always choose to collaborate, especially being a white and privileged person in this space. At the very least, I hope that this becomes a provocation and a conversation starter. I hope this could be the start of a conversation with potential future collaborators. And I have found from experience that it often helps to have something to show when approaching different groups that says, look, we're serious about this and we're willing to commit. So yeah, hopefully this is the beginning of a conversation.